So here we are once again documenting the changing face of our city. In this action-packed episode we've got cinemas, skeletons, casinos, opium dens, railways, ships, a former US military barracks, plus we're going to do a few updates on previous episodes and we're going to take a ride on a riverboat. Welcome to Vanishing Bangkok Part 8. So Bangrak means village of love next to water, and walking around here today I can feel lots of love in the air, but the water part of it has been missing for about 65 years. The Klong Silom Canal used to run through this intersection right behind me and then go round the corner out into the Chao Phraya River. In fact, if this was 1961, I would be standing in the canal right in front of a historic royal bridge called Charoen Krung 54. So as we're here, I thought let's do a past and present of Bangrak intersection. So the Klong Silom Canal was covered over in the early 60s by Charoen Krung Soi 42, and where the canal met the river is a famous landmark today. You might know it. It's called Jack's Bar. Well, this is the third time in the last 5 or 6 years that a hotel has opened in the Old Prince Theatre and has had to close its doors. And I think it's a real shame that there's not enough people out there to appreciate a film-themed hotel in a building with a history going back over 100 years. So this building dates back to 1912 when it opened as the Bangrak Royal Casino, Thailand's first ever legal casino. And with that came lots of antisocial problems, particularly in these alleyways around here. They'd put the music up really loud so people drank more, gambled more, lost more money. And then at closing times there'd be fights, people got robbed, and these alleyways were full of gambling dens, brothels, opium dens, so it wasn't a great place to hang out 100 years ago. The casino closed after 5 years in 1917, and they opened the Prince Theatre a few years later, showing black and white movies. The Prince Theatre was a very popular standalone cinema for many decades, but by the 1990s, competition from state-of-the-art cinemas in air-conditioned shopping malls meant that in order to generate more revenue, they started showing porn films. This didn't have a happy ending because by 2009 the cinema was closed and the building became derelict. Well, if you've been up and down the river a few times, you'll probably be familiar with this next building. It's often mistaken for being part of the Oriental Hotel, although it does have a connection and does date back to more or less the same era. It's the East Asiatic Company building, and I got a few emails last month telling me that it was currently undergoing demolition, so I thought I'd come and investigate. Hans Niel Andersen first visited Siam in 1873. He was working as a captain on board a Siamese merchant ship called the Thonburi, which was part of a fleet owned by King Rama V. Andersen sailed the ship to Liverpool loaded with teak in 1883, and this was Siam's first ever exportation of teak to Europe, which sold at 100% profit. The ship returned to Siam with a cargo of coal that was sold to the Siamese Navy. In 1884, Hans Niel Andersen set up the company Andersen & Co. in partnership with Peter Andersen and Frederick Kinch. They bought a small hotel on the riverside called the Oriental and rebuilt it into a luxury hotel that opened in 1887. It remains one of the top hotels in the world today. In 1893, Hans Niel Andersen and his partners sold their share in the Oriental Hotel. Andersen returned to Denmark and set up the East Asiatic Company, opening shipping routes with Siam and Southeast Asia. They were sourcing teak from the forests of Phra province, which was a very lucrative business at the time. There were several other companies doing the same. And this established Siam as a major worldwide exporter of teak. By 1923, the Bangkok Times Directory had them listed as steam and motor ship owners, millers of teak and other woods, oil millers, cement manufacturers, owners of rubber and coconut plantations, tin miners, importers and exporters, general merchants. They had offices in 15 different countries and in the following years established themselves as a major force in global shipping, mainly in East Asia and Africa. The East Asiatic Company building dates back to 1898 and was designed by Italian architect Annabella Rigotti in a Renaissance style. It served as the Bangkok headquarters until 1995. In 1907, they built the East Asiatic port and several warehouses just down the river at a location that is known today as the Asiatique riverfront. So during World War II, the Japanese army occupied the East Asiatic port, and 2 years later in 1947, the East Asiatic Company ceased all operations here, 10 years after the passing of Hans Neil Andersen in 1937. So the building was vacated in 1995, and for the next 20 years it served as a filming location, a photographic studio, a market and a mall. And in the last 5 years or so it's become really derelict and run down. It is undergoing renovation at the moment and will open as the Plaza Athene Nobu Hotel and Spa in late 2026. I've come to Bang Khun Non. It's on the MRT Blue Line here in Thonburi across the river. And last time I was here filming, I did the video on the Siriraj area about 3 years ago. And in that video, I stuck to the areas around the hospital, the old train station, the railway tracks, the market. And I talked about how much the area was going to change once they started construction on the MRT Orange Line underground. Anyway, now that construction has been underway for about 2 months, there are large areas that have been fenced off. The heavy machinery is digging as we speak, and There is an area near the hospital where they've been digging, and in the news last week they talked about how they'd unearthed a few unusual, interesting artifacts. So I'm not going to say anything now. I'll tell you all about it once we get there.
Attention please, welcome to Thonburi. Station, please check your belongings before leaving the train. The State Railway of Thailand appreciate you for choosing our services and look forward to serving you again. Thank you.
Well, this station used to be known as Bangkok Noi until about 2003, when they closed down the old Thonburi terminal station about 500 metres down the track there. Anyway, when that shut down, they renamed this station Thonburi, and it's a hive of activity at the moment because they're running extra trains due to the Songkran holidays. So all this area in front of the hospital and alongside the canal is where they're preparing to start construction on the MRT Orange Line station at Siriraj, but there's been a bit of a delay on that. About 3 weeks ago, I was cutting through here doing a walking tour, and I saw that they'd started doing a bit of digging in preparation for the Orange Line construction. So I took a few photos, and in one of my photos I saw what looked like the old foundations of a building, so I thought, ooh, that could be interesting. Anyway, a few days later, this whole area gets designated as an archaeological dig site overseen by the Fine Arts Department, so that means there must be something quite historically significant that they're digging up. Anyway, 1 week after that, it's in the news that they've dug up loads of skeletons of what could be Burmese prisoners of war from 250 years ago. And at that time, this area, Thonburi, was the capital of Siam under the reign of King Thaksin. And he had led the army into several conflicts with the Burmese during his time. So it kind of fits the time frame that there would be Burmese prisoners of war buried here. But the scary thing was, they were shackled by their arms and their legs from behind, and they haven't put a number on how many skeletons that they're digging up at the moment. Anyway, that's the reason why I don't want to be around here once it gets dark, because there could be a lot of restless and disturbed spirits hanging around. When you travel around the world, you've got to keep the most essential items with you at all times. And for me, one of those is water, another one is cat food, but the most important one is poker fire. It's a terrible feeling arriving in Bangkok suffering from jet lag, but there is something worse, and that is slow data speed. You can't even open Grab to organise a taxi. That's why I carry the Smart Go PokerFi Pocket Wi-Fi hotspot. Forget about eSIMs, tourist SIMs, data SIMs, handing over your passport in 7-Eleven. PokerFi works in 170 countries and comes with 5 gigabytes of global data. It can be used by up to 8 devices and is great for groups or families. The app is very simple, you get 16 hours of battery life and it's easy to top up. Click the link or the QR for a discount and say goodbye to slow data speeds. Between 1962 and 1971, Saphan Khwai was home to many US military personnel who were taking part in the Vietnam War. Just up the road here was Seri Court, the main barracks that was home to the Radio Research and Special Operations Unit, and I want to see if it's still there. I've come to camping ground, you might know it, it's on Pradipat Road, and it's a nice place to sit under the trees and get some respite from the hot sun today, and you can eat, drink and chill out well into the evening. At the back of the land is the old Seri Court, a US military barracks that was active during the Vietnam War, home to the Army Security Agency's 5th Radio Research and Special Operations Unit, and I've been granted access to go in there and take a few photos and see what it's like today. During this time, there were also officers stationed at the nearby Capital Hotel on Pahonyotin Road. And that hotel is still very much alive and well today, although I think it's more long stay apartments, but the building looks pretty much the same as it did over 60 years ago. One of the most well-known bars around here where the GIs would go and let off steam was Susie's Bar, not far from Seri Court. There were several other bars and massage parlours that also catered for their needs, and some are still in business today. It's fair to say that Saphan Khwai still has a few sleazy corners, including the old cinema. Last year, Central Chitlom underwent serious renovation work, and in a previous episode I moaned about this because they were covering up the brown marble exterior, which I liked, and I assumed they were just going to turn it into another generic looking shopping mall. But I was pleasantly surprised because the new design they've unveiled is actually a throwback to the original 1974 architecture from when they first opened. I'm not a huge fan of what they've done inside the store though, because I always preferred Central's department store format layout. And what they've done now is turn 2 of the floors into high-end fashion boutiques, which is not really my cup of tea, but I'm very sure it's many rich people's cups of tea. But it's not going to stop me visiting my favourite Tops supermarket. Well, last time I came to Thonburi intersection, they'd just finished clearing all the old shop houses and buildings right in the middle, and I was wondering what they would end up building here, and I said I hoped it would be something very Chinese, as we are in the middle of Chinatown. Well, now I know what they are going to build. It's not quite Chinese, but it is grand. In the short term here, they've turned half of it into a car park and the other half into a street food market, which is open in the evenings. And there's some really good food available, reasonable prices as well, not a tourist rip-off as you'd expect. When they cleared the land in the middle, it put a bit more light on this part of Charoen Krung Road, and they've even built a new Chinatown gate here. It was quite gloomy before, and there's a couple of bars further down that are more or less in prime spots now, because when you walk around the market you can see them clearly, but once a new development goes up they might be back amongst the doom and the gloom. Well, there's a bit of information here about the future development, and it's going to be the Grand Centre Point Chinatown Hotel. When I did the video last year, I suggested they were going to just build a generic looking shopping mall and it would spoil the sort of ambience of Chinatown, but that is definitely not the case. Anyway, not sure if this info has been released in the media. If not, then hopefully you heard it here first. In a previous episode, we looked at the One Bangkok project, and at the time it was still having the finishing touches put on it before it opened. And I talked about how it had been built on the former locations of the old Lumpini Boxing Stadium and Charoen Krung Night Bazaar, which was a very popular night market for its time. Now, of course, we have the new Lumpini Boxing Stadium over in Bangkok. That's been open almost 10 years, and many of the businesses from Charoen Krung Night Bazaar reopened a couple of years later over at Asiatique Riverfront. Anyway, now that One Bangkok is properly open, has it lived up to the hype? So I had a walk around. It is a very impressive development, but what I liked about the complex was they have a museum looking at the history of the Saladeng Telegraph and Radio Communication Centre that was on that site from 1913, and that was where the first ever radio broadcast took place in Thailand. So if I had to recommend One Bangkok, I would say visit the museum and then grab a bite to eat either before or after at the food area downstairs. Last time I came to the robot building was about a year ago, and in that video I suggested that as a nod to its past, they could put a pair of eyes at the top of it to make it look a little bit like a robot. But seeing it here today, almost finished, they haven't done that. And I think that's a shame because they've missed a chance to regain a bit of credibility after the backlash they got for totally destroying the award-winning architectural robotic design of Sumet Chumsai. But hey, who am I to stand in the way of progress? Well, that just about wraps up Vanishing Bangkok Part 8. I hope you found it interesting, educational, or even exciting. Please do subscribe if you haven't already done so. If you want to support the channel, you can do so via the Buy Me a Coffee link on the screen here. That just leaves me to say what I always say. Thanks for watching, and unless I vanish, oops, I'll see you soon.